When a homeless Navy SEAL unlocked his grandfather's buried bunker, his K-9 uncovered a secret powerful men would kill to keep hidden. After my grandfather's will was read, a homeless Navy SEAL got a bunker key. His dog found what they hid inside. Ryan Mercer thought he was inheriting 5 acres of worthless Montana dirt. Instead, guided by the instincts of his retired military K-9, he uncovered a hidden bunker beneath a mountain ridge, and proof that his grandfather's silence wasn't abandonment, but protection from a powerful enemy still watching. Comment 1 if you'd open the bunker, or 0 if you'd walk away, and tell us where you're watching from. The bus depot on Division Street never really slept. Even at 2 in the morning, engines coughed in the distance, tires hissed against wet pavement, and tired travelers dragged their lives behind them in rolling suitcases. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in glass. Ryan Mercer sat behind the wheel of his aging Ford F-150, parked beneath a flickering street lamp that painted everything in sickly yellow. He hadn't meant to end up here. 3 months ago, he had been sleeping in a modest apartment on base housing. Before that, he had been halfway across the world, running night operations in places no one ever mentioned on the news. Now his world had shrunk to the cab of a truck and the small patch of cracked asphalt he tried not to lose. Atlas shifted in the passenger seat. The German Shepherd's gray and black coat caught the light when he lifted his head. A long scar cut through the fur along his shoulder, an old reminder from a mission overseas. His amber eyes moved constantly, scanning, calculating. Even asleep, the dog never truly rested. Neither did Ryan. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since the discharge. Officially, it had been called Administrative Separation Pending Review. Unofficially, it was a quiet burial, a classified operation that went sideways, a call made in seconds, a chain of consequences that rolled downhill faster than any report could stop. Ryan had taken responsibility. That was what leaders did, but leadership didn't stop the flashbacks. He leaned back against the headrest, eyes fixed on the bus station doors. Every time someone pushed through them, his shoulders tightened. He cataloged faces automatically. Age, build, hands, posture. He noticed who scanned the room and who didn't, who walked with confidence, who kept their right hand too close to their jacket pocket. Hypervigilance, the VA therapist had called it. Ryan called it survival. A Greyhound bus pulled in, air brakes shrieking. The sound punched through him. For half a second he was somewhere else. Desert wind, rotor wash, the metallic scent of burned circuitry. His fingers gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went pale. "Easy," he muttered. Atlas's nose pressed into his forearm. It was subtle, just pressure, warm and steady. The same signal the dog had given him in a blown-out building halfway across the world when Ryan's breathing had started to spiral. Grounding, the trainers called it. A reminder of the present. Ryan exhaled slowly. "I'm here," he said quietly, more to himself than the dog. Atlas's tail thumped once against the seat. They had been a team for 5 years. Explosive detection. Direct action support. Atlas had pulled him backward by the sleeve once, seconds before a buried device detonated along a convoy route. Ryan still remembered the heat blooming across the road, the ringing silence after, the realization that he was alive because the dog had trusted his nose more than Ryan had trusted his own eyes. When the separation paperwork came down, Atlas had come with him. Retired working dog, the document read. But to Ryan, Atlas wasn't retired. He was family. Ryan reached into the back seat and pulled a folded blanket over his legs. The truck smelled faintly of motor oil and old coffee. He had learned which grocery stores left their parking lots unmonitored overnight, which rest areas were quiet, which cops would knock on the window and which would let him be. The phone rang. The cheap, prepaid phone vibrated against the dashboard, its sudden buzz slicing through the night like a blade. Ryan's pulse jumped before he could stop it. Unknown number. He hesitated. Most calls these days were bill collectors or automated systems reminding him of appointments he had stopped attending. He let it ring twice more before answering. Mercer. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice, calm but careful. Is this Ryan Mercer? Yes. My name is Margaret Doyle. I'm an attorney in Cedar Hollow, Montana. I'm calling regarding your grandfather, Thomas Mercer. Ryan's jaw tightened. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in nearly a decade. I think you have the wrong number, he said automatically. I don't believe I do, she replied. Mr. Mercer passed away 3 days ago. You're listed as his next of kin. There's a will to be read. The bus depot noises seemed to recede, as if someone had lowered the volume on the world. Thomas Mercer. The last time Ryan had seen his grandfather, he had been 17, angry, determined to enlist. The argument had burned through the small kitchen of that old Montana farmhouse like wildfire. His grandfather had stood stiff and silent, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, eyes hard as river stones. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, the old man had said. I'm not proving anything, Ryan had shot back. I'm going. They hadn't spoken again. Years passed. Deployment after deployment. A few short emails that faded into nothing. Then silence. Eventually, Ryan had stopped checking. I'm sorry, Margaret Doyle said gently. I know this is sudden. The reading is scheduled for Friday. It would mean a great deal if you attended. Ryan stared at the cracked windshield. What's in it? He asked flatly. I can't discuss specifics over the phone, she said. But you should come. He almost laughed. The man had been a carpenter in a mountain town. There was no fortune waiting, no sprawling estate. At best, there might be a few $1,000s and an old house in need of repair. I'm not exactly in a position to travel, Ryan said. There will be something set aside for you, she replied. Your grandfather was very clear about that. Atlas shifted again, ears lifting at the tone in Ryan's voice. How did he die? Ryan asked. Heart failure. Peacefully, according to the doctor. Peacefully. The word felt foreign. Ryan swallowed. I'll think about it. Friday at 10 a.m., she said. Cedar Hollow Courthouse Annex. I'll leave your name at the front desk. The line clicked off. Ryan lowered the phone slowly. His grandfather was dead. The emotion didn't hit like a wave. It was more like a dull weight settling in his chest. Not sharp enough to wound. Not soft enough to ignore. Numbness had become his default setting. He had expected nothing from Thomas Mercer for years. No calls, no birthday cards, no acknowledgement when news articles mentioned Ryan's deployments. They had drifted into separate worlds and left it that way. Atlas placed his head on Ryan's thigh. The dog's breathing was slow and even, steady. You remember him? Ryan murmured. Atlas blinked once as if the question mattered. Thomas Mercer had liked Atlas the first time he saw him. That had been before the silence, before everything went cold. The old man had crouched in the driveway, running rough hands along the dog's neck. Good eyes, he had said. He'll keep you alive. Ryan had shrugged it off then. Now the memory lingered. He looked around the truck cab. The duffel bag in the back seat held everything he owned. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, discharge papers folded neatly in a waterproof pouch. His bank account barely covered gas and cheap food. Montana was 6 hours away. He could ignore the call. Stay parked beneath the flickering light. Let the past remain buried. But something about the attorney's voice had unsettled him. Not urgency, not pity. Something else, a weight behind the words. Atlas's tail thumped again. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. All right, he said quietly. We'll go. He started the engine. The truck coughed before settling into a low rumble. The bus depot lights reflected in the windshield, then slid away as he pulled into the empty street. The road stretched north into darkness. He didn't know what waited in Cedar Hollow. Probably nothing. Probably just paperwork and dust and a reminder of a relationship that had never quite healed. Still, as the city lights faded behind them and the highway opened up ahead, Ryan felt something shift beneath the numbness. Not hope, but maybe unfinished business. Atlas rested his chin on the center console, eyes forward, as if he already knew the direction mattered. The man with nowhere to go was heading home. The highway north cut through rolling farmland before climbing gradually into the darker spine of western Montana. Pine trees thickened along the road, their tall silhouettes swaying against a pale gray sky. The farther Ryan drove, the quieter the world became. Fewer headlights, fewer buildings, more open land. By the time the sign for Cedar Hollow appeared, white paint faded, bullet holes punched clean through the corners. The morning sun had broken weakly through the clouds. Cedar Hollow wasn't much more than a main street and a handful of side roads, a diner with a red neon sign that buzzed even in daylight, a hardware store with tools displayed in dusty windows, a courthouse annex that looked like it had been added to an older brick building as an afterthought. Ryan parked in front of the courthouse. The truck engine ticked as it cooled. He sat there a moment, staring at the doorway. "You good?" he murmured. Atlas's ears flicked. The dog's body was relaxed but alert as always. Ryan reached over and scratched behind his ear. The familiar weight of the dog's presence steadied him. Inside, the annex smelled faintly of paper and floor polish. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A receptionist glanced up from behind a small desk. "You here for the Mercer reading?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "Second door on the left." The conference room was small. A long oak table sat beneath a framed painting of the Bitterroot Mountains. Two older men in worn flannel jackets occupied one end, speaking in low voices. They glanced at Ryan when he entered, their expressions curious but not unkind. Margaret Doyle stood near the window, flipping through a thin folder. She looked to be in her early 50s, hair pulled back neatly, glasses resting low on her nose. Her gaze sharpened when she saw him. "Mr. Mercer," she said, stepping forward and offering her hand. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Ryan shook her hand. Her grip was firm. "Thank you." She looked down at Atlas briefly. "This must be Atlas." Ryan blinked. "You knew about him?" "Your grandfather mentioned him more than once," she said quietly. "He insisted the dog be allowed in the room." Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. The two older men introduced themselves as neighbors who had helped check on the property during the winter months. They offered brief condolences, then fell silent as Margaret took her seat at the head of the table. She opened the folder. "Thomas Mercer passed without surviving spouse," she began in a calm, measured tone. "No other direct heirs. After settling outstanding debts, medical expenses, and minor liens, the remaining liquid assets total $2,300. The number landed flat. Ryan kept his expression neutral. Margaret continued. "The primary asset is a 5-acre parcel located along the northern ridge outside Cedar Hollow. The property includes no active residents. There is no recorded mortgage." She slid a small envelope across the table toward him. Inside was a single iron key. Old, heavy, dark with age. Underneath it lay a folded piece of parchment paper. Ryan unfolded it carefully. A hand-drawn map, lines marking the ridge, a red circle near the north face, coordinates written in careful block letters, and below them, a single sentence. "The door waits beneath the north ridge. Trust the dog." Ryan's throat went dry. He looked up at Margaret. "There's no cabin?" "No registered structure," she said. "The land has been considered undeveloped for years." One of the older neighbors cleared his throat. "Your granddad didn't care much for paperwork," he muttered. Margaret gave a faint, almost apologetic smile. "There is one more matter." She reached into the folder and removed a sealed letter. "This is addressed to you personally. He instructed that it be given only after the will was read. Ryan stared at the envelope. His name was written in familiar handwriting. Blocky, precise. The same script that had once labeled toolboxes in his grandfather's workshop. He didn't open it. Not yet. "Is that it?" he asked. Margaret hesitated briefly. "There have been inquiries about the property." Ryan looked up sharply. "Inquiries?" "A development firm," she said. "Halstead Holdings. They've been purchasing parcels along the valley for what they describe as luxury expansion. Your grandfather declined several offers." One of the neighbors snorted softly. "Halstead wants the whole ridge." Ryan felt the first spark of something that wasn't numbness. "Why?" he asked. Margaret folded her hands. "Location. Access. The North Ridge overlooks nearly the entire valley. It connects two major parcels he already owns." Ryan glanced back down at the map. The north face. Trust the dog. "So the land's not worthless," he said quietly. Margaret met his eyes. "Not to everyone." The meeting ended quickly after that. Papers were signed, keys handed over formally. The neighbors offered help if he needed it. The room emptied until only Margaret and Ryan remained. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Your grandfather was stubborn," she said. "But he was not careless. If he left you that key and that instruction, it matters." Ryan nodded slowly. Outside, the air felt colder than before. He walked back to the truck, envelope and map tucked carefully into his jacket pocket. Atlas jumped into the passenger seat without prompting. Ryan climbed in and shut the door. For a moment, neither moved. He looked down at the letter again. Old resentment stirred beneath the surface. Years of silence. No explanation. No apology. Now this. A key to something hidden. He tore the envelope open. The letter inside was short. "Ryan, if you are reading this, then I have run out of time. I could not explain before. I could not risk it. What is beneath the ridge belongs to you now. Do not trust easily. Trust Atlas. He will know. I am sorry for the years you believed I did not care. Granddad." Ryan read it twice. Not risk it. Not trust easily. He felt the weight of old anger pressing up against something unfamiliar. Doubt. He slid the letter back into its envelope. "Guess we're taking a drive," he muttered. Atlas's tail tapped once against the seat. Ryan started the engine. As he pulled away from the courthouse, he caught sight of a black SUV parked across the street. Tinted windows. Idling quietly. The driver's face was obscured by glare. Ryan's pulse slowed instead of spiking. He recognized surveillance posture when he saw it. The SUV didn't follow immediately, but in the rearview mirror, he saw it ease into traffic a block later. Old resentment hardened into something else. Suspicion. The inheritance might have looked worthless on paper, but someone was watching it, and that meant it mattered. Ryan didn't look back again. Instead, he adjusted his mirrors subtly and drove past the edge of town without changing his pace. The two-lane road narrowed quickly, trading pavement for cracked asphalt, then gravel. The mountains rose ahead like a dark wall against the sky. Atlas shifted in the passenger seat, nose angled toward the window. His ears were up, but not rigid. Alert. Processing. "Stay sharp," Ryan murmured. He drove another mile before easing the truck into a turnout near a stand of ponderosa pines. He killed the engine and waited. The silence that followed was thick and complete, broken only by the ticking metal of the cooling hood and the faint wind threading through the trees. 10 seconds. 20. Then, far down the road, the black SUV appeared. It rolled past without slowing, windows still tinted, engine low and smooth. The driver never turned his head. Ryan watched until it disappeared around the bend. "Yeah," he muttered. "You're not subtle." He restarted the truck and continued north. The gravel road twisted upward into the Bitterroot foothills, climbing steadily. Cedar Hollow shrank behind him, replaced by dense pine forest and open clearings stitched with tall grass. Snow still clung stubbornly to shaded corners where sunlight rarely reached. The map lay unfolded on the seat between him and Atlas. 5 acres, northern ridge. The road ended where the trees thickened and the land grew rougher. A rusted wire fence leaned crookedly along one side, half swallowed by brush. Ryan pulled the truck as far as he could before the path narrowed to little more than twin ruts in the dirt. He stepped out, boots crunching against gravel. The air here was different. Colder. Cleaner. It carried the scent of pine sap and damp earth. No traffic noise. No sirens. No distant engines. Just wind. Atlas jumped down beside him, stretching long and low before lifting his head to scan the tree line. His body language shifted instantly, from companion to working dog. Ryan stood still, letting his senses catch up. The property stretched ahead in uneven terrain. A collapsed barn leaned precariously near a cluster of young fir trees. Its roof sagged in the middle like a tired spine. Beyond it, the land rose sharply into a rocky ridge covered in thick brush. The north face would be on the far side of that rise. Ryan walked slowly across the field, boots sinking into patches of soft soil. His mind mapped distances automatically. Lines of sight. Elevation advantages. Blind corners. He hated that he couldn't turn it off. Near the barn, he paused. The wooden boards were weathered silver, nails rusted, hinges broken. He stepped inside cautiously. The interior smelled of dust and old hay. Sunlight cut through the broken slats in narrow beams. Nothing moved. Nothing felt disturbed. He stepped back outside. The ridge loomed above him now, steeper than it had looked from below. The trees along its spine were thicker, darker. From the top, he imagined, you could see the entire valley, strategic. He shook the thought away. Atlas had moved ahead, nose low, tail steady. He wasn't pulling hard yet, just investigating. Ryan followed. The climb was slow. The ground turned rocky, slick in places from old snowmelt. His breathing grew heavier as they ascended, but he kept a steady pace. Halfway up, Atlas stopped. His head lifted sharply. Ryan froze. The dog's posture had changed. Ears forward, tail stiff, muscles tense, not aggressive but focused. "What is it?" Ryan whispered. Atlas didn't bark. He stepped sideways, nose sampling the air. Ryan listened. At first he heard only wind moving through the pines. Then faint, distant, the low hum of an engine. He pivoted slightly, scanning down toward the access road below. Through a gap in the trees, he caught a glimpse of dark paint between branches. The black SUV. It had parked near the edge of the property. Ryan's jaw tightened. "They're early," he muttered. Atlas gave a low growl, barely audible. Ryan crouched instinctively, lowering his profile behind a boulder. The SUV remained still. 2 figures stepped out, both wearing dark jackets. They didn't approach immediately. One pointed toward the ridge. They were observing, not rushing. Ryan felt the familiar slide into operational mindset, heart rate steady, breath controlled, vision sharpening around the edges. He counted distances again. They were too far to identify clearly, but close enough to send a message. Atlas shifted beside him, waiting for command. "No," Ryan whispered. "We're not engaging." The men remained near the vehicle, speaking briefly before one of them lifted binoculars. Ryan exhaled slowly. This wasn't random. This wasn't curiosity. They wanted him to know they were there. After a few minutes, the men returned to the SUV. The engine hummed back to life, and the vehicle rolled slowly down the dirt road until it disappeared beyond the trees. The silence returned, but it was heavier now. Ryan stood slowly. Atlas's body remained tight, eyes scanning the space where the SUV had been. "They don't want the barn," Ryan said quietly. "They want the ridge. The ridge that overlooked everything. The ridge mentioned in the letter. The ridge with something hidden beneath its north face." Ryan's pulse slowed again. Not from fear, but from clarity. He had expected resentment when he arrived, maybe disappointment. Instead, something else was building. He continued climbing. At the crest of the ridge, the land flattened briefly before sloping sharply down the other side. The valley stretched wide beneath them, rolling hills, distant farmland, the faint ribbon of a highway cutting across the landscape. Beautiful, strategic. Ryan stood there longer than he meant to. The wind tugged at his jacket. Atlas stood beside him, steady and silent. Then the dog turned sharply and moved toward the northern descent. Ryan followed. The north face was steeper and shaded, the ground darker with moss and damp soil. Fallen branches lay tangled between rocks. The incline demanded caution. Atlas moved carefully, nose low, weaving between brush and stone. Ryan's boots slipped once, sending a small cascade of loose dirt downward. He steadied himself against a pine trunk. Halfway down, Atlas stopped again. This time, he didn't growl. He stared, fixed, at a specific patch of earth beneath a cluster of overgrown ferns. Ryan approached slowly. "What do you see?" he murmured. Atlas stepped forward and sniffed along the ground. Then he circled once, twice. His tail lifted slightly, not in aggression, but recognition. Ryan felt something stir. The dog lowered his head and pressed his nose firmly against the earth. Then he pawed once, not frantic, deliberate. Ryan crouched. The soil here looked slightly disturbed compared to the surrounding ground. The moss thinner, the rock beneath flatter than natural formation would suggest. Atlas pawed again, harder this time. Ryan placed his hand against the ground. Cold, solid beneath the top layer. He brushed away loose dirt and leaves. Something gray appeared under the soil. Concrete. His heartbeat quickened. He cleared more earth, revealing a clean edge beneath the moss. Not natural rock. Too straight. Atlas stepped back and watched him, breathing steady but intense. "Okay," Ryan whispered. The ridge didn't just overlook the valley. It was hiding something, and Atlas had found it. Ryan brushed away more dirt with his bare hands, fingers digging into the cold earth. The soil came loose quickly, as if it had been placed there rather than grown there. Moss peeled back in strips, revealing a flat, square surface beneath. Concrete. Not natural stone. Not random debris. Clean edges. Intentional lines. Ryan's breathing slowed into the measured rhythm he had learned overseas. Slow inhale. Controlled exhale. Clear mind. Atlas stepped closer, nose hovering inches above the exposed surface. He wasn't barking. He wasn't agitated. He was certain. "Good boy," Ryan murmured. He widened the cleared area carefully, pushing aside pine needles and loose gravel. The outline became unmistakable. A rectangular slab set flush into the hillside, nearly invisible from a distance. Near the center, just barely visible under packed dirt, was a recessed metal ring. Ryan wiped his palms against his jeans and hooked 2 fingers under the ring. He pulled. Nothing. The slab didn't move. He leaned back and scanned the surface more carefully. On the lower edge, almost concealed by compacted soil, he saw it. A dark keyhole. His pulse ticked upward. The iron key sat heavy in his jacket pocket. He glanced over his shoulder instinctively, scanning the forest behind them. The ridge was quiet. Wind moved through branches in a low, constant murmur. No engine noise, no footfalls. But the sense of being watched lingered. He pulled the key free. It felt older than it looked. Solid. Cold. Worn smooth where hands had held it repeatedly. Ryan knelt and cleared the keyhole fully, scraping away dirt with a small folding knife from his pocket. The metal beneath was rusted but intact. Atlas sat down beside him without being told. Not relaxed. Guarding. Ryan inserted the key. For a moment, it resisted. The iron teeth scraped against old metal, producing a dry, grinding sound that echoed faintly against the hillside. He tightened his grip. Come on, he muttered. He twisted. The lock fought him. Then, a deep internal click, followed by a heavy metallic shift that seemed to reverberate through the ground itself. Atlas stood immediately, ears snapping upright. Ryan felt it in his chest. That wasn't just a latch. That was weight moving. He stood and pulled the ring again. This time the slab shifted upward slightly, breaking the seal of soil around its edges. A musty breath of trapped air seeped out, carrying the scent of concrete and old metal. He repositioned his grip and heaved. The slab lifted slowly, hinged at the top edge. It was thicker than he expected, reinforced from beneath. Muscles in his arms strained as he raised it enough to reveal darkness below. A narrow opening led down into blackness. Concrete steps descended into a square void. Ryan's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. He grabbed the small flashlight from his pocket and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, revealing gray walls and dust suspended in the air. A bunker. Atlas stepped forward to the edge, nostrils flaring. He sniffed once, twice, then leaned slightly closer. Ryan crouched beside him. No scent of decay, he whispered. No recent disturbance. Atlas's body relaxed just a fraction. Ryan glanced back toward the ridge crest one more time. Still nothing. He stood and wedged the slab open fully. It rested upright against the hillside, heavy but stable. Cold air rose from the stairwell, brushing against his face. He hesitated. The old anger from the will reading flickered briefly in his mind. Worthless land. Abandonment. Silence. But this wasn't worthless. This was deliberate. He stepped down. The concrete stairs were narrow but solid. His boots echoed faintly with each step. Atlas followed closely behind, claws clicking lightly against the cement. 5 steps. 10. The beam of the flashlight widened as the space opened up. Ryan reached the bottom and paused. The room was larger than he expected, roughly 20 feet by 20 feet. Poured concrete walls reinforced with steel beams overhead. Shelving lined one side, stacked with neatly arranged metal tins and sealed containers. A cot sat against the far wall, wool blanket folded with precise corners. A small wooden table stood beneath a single battery lantern mounted to the wall. Dust coated everything evenly. No footprints. No fresh disturbance. Atlas moved slowly into the room, nose sweeping methodically across the floor. He circled once, then paused near the cot. Ryan stepped fully inside. He turned and examined the interior door mechanism from within. The keyhole extended through. A simple manual locking system. Whoever built this bunker had expected to use it. Ryan ran his fingers along the concrete wall. Solid. Carefully constructed. He turned the flashlight toward the shelves. Military surplus supplies. Old but intact. Water containers. Emergency rations. Sealed respirator masks. This wasn't paranoia, Ryan muttered softly. This was preparation. Atlas stopped near a metal footlocker partially tucked beneath the cot. He didn't touch it. He just stood there. Ryan approached slowly. The footlocker was olive green, edges chipped from age. No lock, just metal clasps. His chest tightened unexpectedly. He crouched and flipped the clasps open. The lid creaked as he lifted it. Inside lay folded flannel shirts and denim overalls. Work clothes, worn but clean. The scent hit him immediately. Sawdust, old pine, his grandfather's workshop. Ryan froze. He hadn't expected memory to feel like that. Beneath the clothes sat a framed photograph. He picked it up carefully. A younger version of himself, no more than 8 years old, sat on Thomas Mercer's shoulders near a riverbank, both of them squinting into bright sunlight, both smiling. Ryan didn't remember the photo being taken, but he remembered that day. The sound of water over stones, the feel of his grandfather's steady hands holding his legs so he wouldn't fall. A sudden tightness gripped his throat. Atlas pressed gently against his back. Ryan swallowed. He reached deeper into the locker. At the bottom lay a sealed envelope, his name written in the same careful block letters. Ryan's pulse pounded. The air in the bunker felt thinner. He sat slowly on the edge of the cot, envelope in hand. For a moment, he didn't move. The silence beneath the mountain pressed in around him. No wind, no birds, no distant engines, just his own breathing. Atlas sat directly in front of him, eyes steady and unwavering. Ryan slid his finger beneath the flap and tore the envelope open. The paper inside was thick. He unfolded it. The first line made his vision blur slightly. Ryan, if you are reading this, then the world has moved faster than I could hold it back. He exhaled shakily. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand as he began to read, and the past, long buried beneath silence, began to surface. Ryan, if you are reading this, then the world has moved faster than I could hold it back. I prayed you would never need to see what lies beneath this ridge. But if you are here, then the time for silence has passed. I owe you the truth. Ryan swallowed hard. Atlas sat directly in front of him, amber eyes steady, as if guarding the moment itself. Years ago, before you enlisted, before your parents died, I made a mistake. I trusted a man named Victor Halstead. The name hit like a physical impact. Ryan lowered the page briefly, staring into the dim bunker air. Halstead, the same development firm Margaret Doyle had mentioned, the same name tied to the black SUV idling on his grandfather's land. He forced himself to continue. Victor Halstead presented himself as a businessman interested in bringing growth to Cedar Hollow. He promised jobs, infrastructure, opportunity. But behind closed doors, he was building something else entirely. He acquired land quietly, through pressure, through leverage, through threats disguised as contracts. He secured federal defense partnerships that allowed him to develop communications facilities across private land under the appearance of national interest. But that was not his true goal. Ryan's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. Your grandfather had once been a military engineer before settling into carpentry. I worked contract projects for federal subcontractors. I understood infrastructure. I understood the difference between what is built for protection and what is built for control. Halstead was not building infrastructure for defense. He was building a private surveillance corridor across rural land, using defense funding as cover. Ryan's breathing slowed unnaturally, a calm before impact. He could see it now, communications towers disguised as agricultural upgrades, fiber lines buried beneath farmland, high ground positions overlooking valleys, the ridge. He returned to the letter. When I realized what he was doing, I confronted him. I told him I would not participate further. I told him I would report the irregularities I had documented. That was the day everything changed. I began seeing vehicles parked down the road at night. I noticed unfamiliar faces in town. Your parents started receiving strange calls. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was not. Ryan's hands tightened on the paper. Atlas shifted slightly, pressing closer to his leg. Then your parents died in what the authorities ruled an accident. Brake failure on a mountain road. But I had seen the inspection report myself weeks earlier. There was no defect. Ryan's vision blurred. He remembered that night. The flashing lights, the whispering adults, the silence that followed. He had been 17. He had believed it was tragedy. He had never considered intent. I had no proof. Only patterns. Only instinct. But I knew what Halstead was capable of. And I knew that if I continued pushing, you would become leverage. You were already being watched. Ryan's chest constricted. Images from his youth flickered into focus. Cars parked too long near the farmhouse. A man at the grocery store who seemed to recognize him. His grandfather's sudden insistence that Ryan stay inside after dark. I made the only decision I believed would keep you alive. I severed you from me. I made it look like abandonment. The words struck harder than anything that came before. I told you I was done. I forced distance. I let the state take guardianship so that your name would disappear into paperwork and bureaucracy. I let you hate me. Ryan lowered the letter. The bunker felt smaller, the air heavier. 8 years of silence. 8 years of resentment. He had built his strength on that anger. Used it to fuel training. Used it to numb loss. Atlas leaned forward and rested his head against Ryan's knee. The contact was grounding. He continued reading. I built this bunker years before as a contingency. If Halstead ever came for the ridge openly, I would have documentation ready. I copied ledgers. I recorded meetings. I tracked transactions that no one else thought to question. But once your parents were gone, my fight became smaller. It became you. If Halstead could not use you against me, then he had nothing left to threaten. I watched from a distance. I followed your deployments. I tracked your awards. I saw your name in reports I was never meant to see. I was proud of you. Every day. Ryan's breath hitched. He had thought he'd been alone. He had thought the silence meant indifference. Instead, it had been protection. He read the final lines slowly. If I am gone, then Halstead will move quickly. The ridge is strategic to his expansion. He believes I died without heirs who matter. He does not know about you. Trust Atlas. He will sense what I could not finish. And know this, Ryan. You were never abandoned. You were shielded. The paper slipped from Ryan's fingers and fell softly to the bunker floor. For a long moment, he didn't move. The anger that had fueled him for years fractured like brittle glass. In its place rose something far more painful. Grief. Raw. Unfiltered. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands gripping his hair. The bunker walls blurred. His breathing turned uneven. Atlas rose immediately, pressing against his chest. The dog's steady warmth anchored him to the present. Ryan's shoulders shook, not with rage, not with panic, but with release. All the years of believing he had not been worth staying for, all the nights wondering what he had done wrong, they dissolved in that underground room. I thought you left, he whispered hoarsely. Atlas nudged his chin upward gently. Ryan let the tears come. There was no one to witness it but concrete walls and a retired military dog. He cried for the grandfather he had misjudged, for the parents he never questioned losing, for the younger version of himself who had swallowed anger instead of truth. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually, the storm quieted. The bunker no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a confession. Ryan picked up the letter again, smoothing its creases carefully. At the bottom, beneath the signature, one final line had been written. The truth is deeper than this room. Find it before he does. Ryan's eyes shifted toward the cot, toward the concrete floor beneath it. Atlas followed his gaze. The dog's posture shifted once more, not sorrow now, but alert. The grief had cleared something inside Ryan. Where anger once lived, there was now focus. Halstead hadn't just stolen land, he had stolen lives, and he thought the ridge belonged to him. Ryan folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his jacket. He rose slowly to his feet. All right, he said quietly. Atlas stood beside him. If he's moving fast, then so are we. The silence beneath the mountain shifted. What had begun as sorrow was turning into resolve. Ryan stood in the center of the bunker, breathing evenly now. The grief had burned through him like a wildfire, leaving something steadier in its wake. His grandfather had not abandoned him. He had repositioned him, shielded him. The anger that once felt like strength had been a misunderstanding. Atlas stepped forward and nudged the edge of the cot. Not urgently, not anxiously, deliberately. Ryan noticed it immediately. "You smell something," he said quietly. Atlas's nose pressed beneath the frame. Ryan crouched and shined the flashlight along the concrete floor under the cot. At first glance, it looked uniform, smooth, poured, sealed. But when he angled the beam slightly, he saw it. A faint seam, a square outline in the concrete, too precise to be random. Ryan ran his hand across it. The line was almost invisible, disguised by dust and age. His grandfather had built this carefully, hidden in plain sight. "Of course," Ryan muttered. The letter had said the truth was deeper than the room. Atlas stepped back slightly, giving him space. Ryan pulled his folding knife from his pocket and wedged the flat edge into the seam. He applied slow, steady pressure. The concrete slab resisted at first, then gave a subtle shift. He repositioned his grip and pried upward. With a low scraping sound, the panel lifted. Beneath it was a recessed compartment, lined in steel. Inside sat a compact safe. Ryan exhaled slowly. The safe wasn't large, but it was heavy. Matte gray. Manual dial lock. No electronic keypad. No power source required. His grandfather had anticipated more than just secrecy. He had anticipated outages, failures, interference. Ryan set the safe on the table beneath the lantern. He stared at it for several seconds. Atlas remained standing beside him, eyes fixed on the object. "Let's see what you were protecting," Ryan murmured. He examined the dial carefully. Old mechanical system, not too complex. His grandfather hadn't been flashy. Ryan turned the dial slowly, listening. The bunker amplified every subtle click, every minute shift in tension. He rotated once, twice. A faint internal movement responded. He adjusted the dial carefully. Third rotation, then a soft mechanical release. He paused. He hadn't expected it to open so easily. The latch lifted. Ryan opened the safe. Inside, stacks of banded cash sat neatly arranged in one section, clean, untouched. Beneath them lay several sealed manila envelopes and 2 encrypted hard drives. A leather-bound ledger rested at the bottom. Ryan picked up the ledger first. The leather was worn smooth at the edges. Inside, pages were filled with tight, precise handwriting. Dates, land parcel numbers, transaction amounts, initials. Some entries were highlighted in red. He flipped a few pages. Names appeared repeatedly. Victor Halstead. Shell companies. Federal subcontract numbers. Infrastructure grants. Rural land acquisitions. Ryan's pulse slowed again. Not from fear this time, but from clarity. This wasn't suspicion. It was documentation. Atlas shifted toward the bunker entrance, ears lifting suddenly. Ryan froze. He heard it too. A distant vehicle, not close enough to pinpoint direction, but present. He closed the safe halfway and stood. The bunker walls seemed to amplify the faint rumble from outside. Atlas's posture changed instantly. Head forward, muscles engaged, tail rigid. Ryan moved toward the stairwell and climbed halfway up, staying low beneath the open hatch. The rumble grew louder, then stopped. Silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This one carried tension. Ryan remained still for a full minute. Then 2. No footsteps. No voices. Just wind above the ridge. Atlas did not relax. "He's testing," Ryan whispered. Victor Halstead didn't need to charge in. Not yet. He needed to measure resistance. Gauge risk. Ryan descended back into the bunker. He closed the safe fully and returned it to the compartment beneath the floor. He slid the panel back into place, brushing dust across the seam until it blended naturally again. The ledger and 1 hard drive, however, he kept out. He sat back on the cot and opened the ledger once more. His grandfather had not been reckless. He had organized everything by code, cross-referenced to specific county filings. Transaction dates aligned with recorded land purchases. Government grant numbers corresponded with defense infrastructure allocations. Halstead hadn't simply bought land. He had acquired vantage points. The ridge Ryan now owned sat directly between two existing Halstead properties. High ground, control of signal flow, surveillance lines. Ryan leaned back slightly. He could see it. A corridor of private control disguised as development. He flipped to the final pages. The most recent entry was dated 2 weeks ago. Even while dying, his grandfather had kept recording. Ryan closed the ledger gently. Atlas finally relaxed a fraction, lowering his body to the floor but keeping his head upright. "You knew," Ryan murmured to him. "That's why he wrote it." "Trust the dog." Ryan looked around the bunker again. The room no longer felt like a relic. It felt like a command post. His PTSD mind, once scattered by flashbacks and noise, felt unexpectedly clear in the stillness. Combat had taught him something essential. When someone watches from a distance, it means they fear what you might do. Halstead was watching, which meant Halstead was concerned. Ryan stood and moved to the stairwell again. He climbed carefully, pushing the heavy slab open fully. Daylight flooded down the steps. The valley stretched quiet below, but the ground near the dirt road told a different story. Fresh tire tracks, 2 vehicles. He crouched near the edge of the ridge and studied them. Recent, within the last hour. Atlas stood beside him, scanning. "They want to pressure," Ryan said quietly. "Make it uncomfortable." He stood and surveyed the property. The barn, the ridge, the valley beyond. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Hollow, he didn't feel like a man with nowhere to go. He felt positioned. Atlas pressed against his leg. The old numbness had been replaced by something steady. Purpose. Ryan looked down at the dog. "We're not running," he said. Atlas's tail gave one slow, firm sweep. The silence beneath the mountain had done what therapy never quite could. It had aligned the past with the present. Halstead believed Ryan was alone. He wasn't. He had the truth. He had evidence. And he had a dog who had never once failed him. The calm had settled, but it would not last. Because someone was coming back. And next time they wouldn't just watch. Ryan stood at the edge of the ridge for several long seconds, studying the fresh tire tracks below. They cut through the dirt like scars, sharp and undeniable. 2 vehicles, wide tread, heavy suspension. Not farm trucks, not hunters, professional. Atlas paced once, then returned to Ryan's side, gaze locked on the tree line. The dog's instincts were not reactive now. They were anticipatory. He wasn't responding to danger. He was preparing for it. Ryan exhaled slowly. The ledger was only part of the story. The letter had been clear. The truth was deeper than the room. He turned back toward the bunker entrance. "We missed something," he murmured. Atlas followed him without hesitation. Inside the bunker, the air felt colder now, not from temperature, but from awareness. Ryan lowered the slab and sealed the entrance behind them, shutting out the light. He moved methodically around the room. Shelves, walls, ceiling beams. His grandfather had been precise, layered in thought. If there was another safeguard, it wouldn't be obvious. Atlas returned to the cot and lowered his head again, sniffing along the metal frame. Ryan crouched beside him. "You're stuck on that spot," he said quietly. The dog's nose traced a slow line across the underside of the cot. Not the floor seam this time, the frame itself. Ryan ran his fingers along the metal tubing. It felt hollow. He shifted the cot slightly. It scraped softly across the concrete. Atlas stiffened again. Ryan flipped the cot onto its side. Nothing unusual at first glance, but along the underside of one support beam, near the headboard, was a small capped opening, barely noticeable. Ryan frowned. He unscrewed the cap slowly. Inside the hollow frame, something metallic slid downward and clinked softly against the floor. A small flash drive, wrapped in electrical tape. Ryan stared at it. His grandfather had hidden digital evidence inside the bed frame itself. Layered redundancy. Atlas watched closely as Ryan peeled the tape back and examined the drive. "This is what he didn't want in the safe," Ryan said. "Something separate. Something more sensitive." He moved to the table and retrieved one of the encrypted hard drives from the safe compartment. He compared the size and brand. Different manufacturer, different labeling. The drive from the bed frame bore no markings. Ryan's mind ran through possibilities. Backup footage, recorded conversations, something too dangerous to leave with the main ledger. Atlas suddenly lifted his head sharply. Ryan froze. This time the engine noise was closer. Not faint, immediate. It came from directly below the ridge. Ryan moved swiftly to the stairwell and cracked the slab open just enough to peer out. A black SUV had returned. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second vehicle idled behind it. 2 men stepped out of the lead SUV. A third remained inside the second. They weren't observing now. They were advancing. One man pointed toward the ridge and began walking up the incline. Atlas growled. Low, controlled, deadly serious. Ryan closed the slab quietly and descended. "They're not bluffing," he said under his breath. Atlas moved to his side automatically. Ryan looked around the bunker. There was no secondary exit, no escape tunnel. The bunker was built for hiding, not fleeing. The men above moved closer. He could hear boots shifting gravel. Ryan's heart rate steadied into operational rhythm. He scanned the room for options. He wasn't here to escalate. He was here to survive and protect the evidence. Atlas's body trembled slightly. Not from fear, but readiness. Ryan crouched beside him and placed both hands on the dog's neck. "Listen," he whispered. "No attack unless I say. You stay." Atlas's ears flicked, but did not relax. Above them, a heavy thud echoed. Someone had stepped onto the slab. Metal shifted faintly. They had found the hatch. Ryan extinguished the flashlight. The bunker plunged into near-total darkness, illuminated only by thin slivers of light around the hatch edges. Another thud. A metallic rattle. The slab lifted slightly, letting a shaft of daylight cut through the black. A voice filtered down. "Mercer, we know you're down there!" Ryan's jaw tightened. The voice carried confidence, controlled aggression. "Victor Halstead wants to talk," the man called down. "Face to face." Atlas's growl deepened. Ryan remained silent. The man continued. "This doesn't have to get complicated. The land's worth more to him than it is to you. We can make this easy." Ryan stepped forward just enough that his silhouette became visible from below. "I'm not interested," he called back calmly. A pause, then a dry chuckle. "You should be," the man replied. "There are ways this can go that won't be pleasant." Ryan stepped into the light fully now, face visible. "Then you'd better choose carefully," he said. The man above studied him. Ryan could see his outline clearly. Mid-30s, clean jacket, no visible weapon, but posture controlled. The man's eyes dropped briefly to Atlas. "Nice dog," he said. "Would hate to see something happen to him." Atlas's growl shifted tone. Ryan's eyes hardened. "That would be your last mistake," he said evenly. Silence stretched between them. The man held Ryan's gaze. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped back. The slab lowered again. Boots retreated across gravel. Engines roared back to life. Ryan waited a full minute before moving. He climbed halfway up and opened the slab cautiously. The SUVs were already turning back toward the access road. Dust lifted behind them. Atlas stood beside him, trembling, not from fear, but from suppressed action. Ryan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did good," he said softly. Atlas's breathing slowed. Ryan closed the hatch and secured it once more. This was no longer surveillance. This was intimidation. Halstead wasn't just moving quickly, he was accelerating. Ryan returned to the table and looked at the flash drive from the cot frame. If Halstead was willing to come personally, then whatever was on that drive mattered. He slid it into his pocket. The emotional calm from earlier had shifted. The silence had given him clarity. Now tension filled the space. The war his grandfather had tried to prevent was knocking at the door. Ryan glanced at Atlas. "We're not hiding," he said quietly. Atlas met his gaze, steady and unwavering. Outside, engines faded into the distance. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. It was beginning. The sun dipped behind the Bitterroot Peaks in a wash of copper and ash, leaving long shadows stretched across the ridge. Ryan stood outside the bunker entrance, scanning the tree line while Atlas circled slowly, nose low, absorbing every trace left behind by the SUVs. The evening air cooled quickly. Mountain cold didn't creep in. It dropped. Ryan sealed the bunker hatch carefully and scattered loose pine needles across the seam. From a distance, the hillside looked untouched again. He didn't trust that camouflage would stop Halstead's men for long, but it might buy time. He and Atlas descended the ridge as dusk settled in layers. The old barn creaked faintly in the wind. The open field below seemed wider now, more exposed. Ryan could almost feel invisible lines drawn across it. Sight lines, approach routes, vulnerability. He reached the truck and opened the passenger door. "Load up," he said quietly. Atlas jumped in without hesitation. Ryan didn't start the engine. Instead, he leaned against the hood and studied the access road. The sky had darkened into deep blue, the first stars faint above the ridge. His mind ran scenarios. If Halstead wanted quick resolution, intimidation wasn't the end. It was the first move. The next would be escalation, pressure, damage, something that forced surrender without creating headlines. Ryan's stomach tightened slightly. "They'll try something tonight," he murmured. Atlas's ears flicked at his voice. Ryan considered leaving the property, heading back into Cedar Hollow, but that would surrender ground. Signal retreat. No, he wouldn't give them that. Instead, he repositioned the truck at an angle that gave him visibility toward the dirt road. He killed all interior lights. He dimmed his phone screen. The mountain night deepened. For a while, there was nothing. Wind, distant owl calls. Atlas lay in the passenger seat, eyes half closed but alert. Ryan forced himself to breathe steadily. Time stretched. Then, headlights. Low beams cutting through the trees. Ryan's pulse slowed instead of spiking. "They're back," he whispered. Two SUVs rolled slowly up the access road. This time, they didn't stop at the lower clearing. They continued forward, closer. Ryan shifted quietly into the driver's seat. Atlas's body tensed instantly. The SUVs stopped near the edge of the field. Doors opened. 4 figures stepped out. Not shouting, not rushing. Controlled. Ryan's hand moved to the small flashlight clipped to his vest, then paused. He opened the truck door and stepped out into the darkness. Atlas followed immediately, positioning himself slightly ahead and to Ryan's left. The men spread out slightly, creating a loose arc. One of them called out, "Mercer, you don't want this to go sideways." Ryan kept his voice calm. "Then leave." A faint laugh carried across the field. "You think this is your fight?" the man replied. "You don't even know what that ridge is worth." Ryan didn't respond. Another man stepped forward slightly, holding something in his hand. A bottle. Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Don't," he said sharply. The bottle shattered against the barn wall. Flames erupted along the dry wood instantly, racing across the weathered boards. The fire caught fast. Too fast. Ryan's breath left him in a sharp exhale. Atlas lunged forward instinctively, barking now, fierce and commanding. Ryan grabbed the dog's collar. "No!" he snapped. The men stepped backward toward their vehicles. One of them shouted over the growing crackle of flame. "Last offer, Mercer! Sell the land!" Ryan ignored him. The barn fire spread violently along the dry timber, sparks climbing into the dark sky. The SUVs pulled away, tires throwing gravel. Silence returned, broken only by the roar of burning wood. Ryan sprinted toward the barn. Atlas ran beside him. The flames climbed the structure quickly, consuming the brittle boards and sagging roof. The heat pushed outward in waves. Ryan grabbed a shovel leaning against the fence and began throwing dirt toward the base of the flames, trying to slow their spread toward the grass. Atlas barked sharply and ran to the far side of the structure, circling. The fire crackled and snapped violently. Ryan's vision narrowed, PTSD flickering dangerously at the edge of his awareness. Fire had a sound, a smell, a memory. He forced it back. "This is here," he muttered. "Now." Atlas suddenly barked louder, more urgent. Ryan turned. The fire was spreading toward a stack of old fuel cans near the rear of the barn. If they ignited— "Move!" Ryan shouted. He sprinted toward them, heat licking at his face. He grabbed one can and flung it clear of the flames. Atlas darted in and seized the handle of another with his teeth, dragging it backward across the dirt. "Good boy," Ryan yelled. The last can sat dangerously close to the fire. Ryan stepped forward to grab it. A loud crack echoed overhead. Part of the barn roof gave way. A flaming beam dropped hard against the ground near his legs. Atlas lunged. The dog slammed into Ryan's side with full force, knocking him backward just as the beam crashed down. Heat exploded across the space where Ryan had been standing seconds before. Ryan hit the dirt hard, breath knocked out of him. Atlas stood over him, barking fiercely at the collapsing structure. Ryan's ears rang. He rolled to his knees and pulled Atlas back as another section of the barn gave way. The fire roared now, consuming everything. Ryan looked at Atlas. The dog's chest heaved, but there was something wrong. Atlas staggered slightly. Ryan's stomach dropped. He saw it then. A dark stain spreading along Atlas's shoulder. Not from the fire, from earlier. During the confrontation at the bunker, one of the men must have struck. The wound had been small, hidden by fur. Now, with exertion, it bled freely. "Atlas," Ryan breathed. The dog tried to stand straight, but wavered. Ryan caught him. The barn collapsed fully behind them in a shower of sparks. Ryan ignored it. He lowered Atlas gently onto the ground and pressed his hand against the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Stay with me," he whispered. Atlas's eyes locked onto his, still steady, still trusting. Ryan ripped open his emergency kit from the truck and applied pressure, hands moving automatically. Combat medicine returned without conscious thought. The bleeding slowed, but Atlas's breathing grew shallow. "Not tonight," Ryan murmured fiercely. "You don't get to leave tonight." The fire burned itself out gradually, leaving blackened remains where the barn once stood. Ryan lifted Atlas carefully and carried him toward the truck. The night air felt colder now. He laid the dog across the passenger seat and climbed in. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed behind them as he drove hard toward Cedar Hollow. His mind was clear. No flashbacks, no panic. Only one objective: keep Atlas alive. As the truck sped down the mountain road, flames flickered in the rearview mirror. Halstead had escalated, but he had also made a mistake. He had drawn blood, and Ryan Mercer did not walk away from that. The truck fishtailed slightly as Ryan took the first sharp bend off the ridge road. Gravel sprayed into the darkness behind him. His headlights carved twin tunnels through the trees, illuminating branches heavy with frost and the pale shimmer of snow gathering along the ditch lines. Atlas lay across the passenger seat, breathing uneven but steady enough to hold hope. Ryan kept one hand on the wheel and the other pressed firmly against the makeshift bandage at Atlas's shoulder. The cloth was already dark with blood. "Stay with me," he repeated quietly. The dog's eyes were open, focused, still present. Ryan's pulse was steady, almost unnaturally calm. Combat clarity had taken over. Every motion deliberate. Every thought aligned toward a single objective. Cedar Hollow's veterinary clinic sat at the far end of Main Street, a low white building with a flickering porch light and a faded wooden sign that read, "Cedar Hollow Animal Care." Ryan skidded to a stop in front of it. He scooped Atlas into his arms and kicked the door open with his boot. A bell rang overhead. "Help!" he shouted. A woman in her early 40s appeared from the back hallway, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled into a loose braid. Dr. Laura Bennett. Ryan recognized her from the diner earlier that afternoon. She had given him a polite nod when he walked in with Atlas. Her expression shifted instantly when she saw the blood. "Put him on the table," she said, already moving. Ryan laid Atlas gently onto the stainless steel surface. The metal echoed under the dog's weight. Laura worked fast, clipping fur, checking pulse, examining the wound with steady hands. "This isn't a burn," she said quietly. "No," Ryan replied. She met his eyes briefly. "Knife," she said. Ryan nodded once. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't ask more questions. "Good news," she said after a moment. "It's deep, but it missed the artery. He's lost blood, but not enough to shut him down if we move quickly." Ryan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Laura prepared sutures and began cleaning the wound thoroughly. Atlas didn't whimper. He didn't struggle. He watched Ryan the entire time. Ryan rested a hand against the dog's head. "You're still on mission," he whispered. The stitching took nearly 40 minutes. Ryan stood still the entire time. No pacing, no flashbacks, no spiraling, only focus. Laura finished and applied a tight wrap around the shoulder. "He's going to be sore," she said. "He needs rest. No running, no jumping." Ryan gave a faint, humorless smile. "I'll try explaining that to him." Laura studied him for a second. "You want to tell me what happened?" she asked gently. Ryan hesitated. He could lie. He could minimize. But Cedar Hollow was small. The burned barn would be visible by morning. "Someone doesn't want me on that land," he said. Laura's eyes sharpened. "That land's been under pressure for years," she said quietly. "Halstead's men don't like being told no." Ryan nodded. Laura folded her arms. "You're not the first person he's pushed," she added. "You might be the first to push back." Ryan looked down at Atlas. "I didn't start it." Laura gave a short, understanding nod. "You're welcome to stay here tonight," she offered. "It's safer than that ridge right now." Ryan considered it. The image of the black SUVs under moonlight replayed in his mind. But then he thought of the bunker, of the ledger, of the flash drive. If Halstead returned and found the hatch unguarded— "No," Ryan said. "We'll go back." Laura studied him again. "You're stubborn," she said. "He was," Ryan replied. Laura understood. She handed him a small packet of antibiotics and pain medication. "If his breathing changes or the wound reopens, you come straight back." Ryan nodded. He carried Atlas back to the truck more carefully this time. The sky had shifted toward midnight. The town was quiet. Snowflakes drifted lightly now, catching in the street lamps like falling ash. Ryan drove slower on the way back. The road climbed in silence. Atlas lay curled but alert, head resting near Ryan's thigh. "You saved me again," Ryan murmured. Atlas's tail tapped once weakly against the seat. The barn's remains came into view as they crested the final hill. Blackened beams stood crooked against the snow-dusted field. Smoke still curled faintly upward. Ryan parked near the ridge and cut the engine. The silence here was different from the bunkers. This was open silence. Exposed. He stepped out and surveyed the damage. The barn was gone, reduced to skeletal timbers and glowing embers. Ryan felt anger stir, but it wasn't wild or blinding. It was controlled, measured. Halstead had wanted intimidation. Instead, he had strengthened resolve. Ryan carried Atlas down into the bunker carefully. He laid blankets across the cot and helped the dog settle onto it. Atlas resisted slightly, wanting to stand. Ryan placed a firm hand against his chest. "Stay," he said. Atlas obeyed. Ryan knelt beside the cot and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. Outside, the wind moved softly across the ridge. The bunker walls felt steadier now, more purposeful. Ryan pulled the ledger from his jacket and placed it on the table. The flash drive from the cot frame lay beside it. He had everything he needed. Proof, motive, escalation. Halstead had crossed the line from pressure to violence, and in doing so he had exposed himself. Ryan looked at Atlas, whose breathing had settled into a slow, rhythmic pattern. "Tomorrow," Ryan said quietly, "we change the battlefield." Atlas's ears flicked at the tone. Ryan stood and secured the hatch from inside. He turned off the lantern. Darkness enveloped the bunker, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt strategic. Above them, snow continued to fall gently over the burned barn. By morning, the valley would see what had happened. Halstead believed fear would break him. He didn't understand the man he had chosen to threaten. Ryan Mercer had spent years surviving chaos, and he was done surviving. He was ready to move. Morning came pale and quiet over the Bitterroot Mountains. Snow had settled into a thin white blanket across the burned remains of the barn, softening the jagged edges of charred timber. Smoke no longer rose. The damage stood silent and undeniable. Ryan stood at the ridge crest with Atlas beside him. The dog moved slower now, shoulder bandaged and stiff, but he insisted on standing. His eyes tracked the valley below as if it were still his patrol zone. "Short shift," Ryan told him gently. "Then you rest." Atlas gave him a steady look that needed no translation. Ryan had barely slept. He had spent the early hours copying files from the ledger and the flash drive onto his laptop inside the bunker. The data was worse than he expected. Transaction records, recorded phone calls, emails between Halstead and subcontractors discussing accelerated acquisition pressure. Landowners had been squeezed out using debt manipulation and false zoning violations. Some had folded. Some had disappeared from town quietly. One had filed bankruptcy 2 years earlier after refusing to sell. Ryan's grandfather had been the last holdout on the ridge. And now Ryan was. He closed the laptop and slid it into his pack. "Time to shift the fight," he said. Atlas walked beside him down the ridge and toward the truck. The drive into Cedar Hollow felt different than the day before. News of the barn fire had already spread. A few townspeople stood near the diner, talking in low voices. Smoke stains on the horizon made explanation unnecessary. Ryan parked in front of Margaret Doyle's office. Atlas stepped out carefully, keeping his weight off the injured side. Inside, Margaret looked up sharply when the door opened. Her eyes moved immediately to the bandage. "What happened?" she demanded. Ryan set the pack on her desk and unzipped it. "Halstead escalated," he said calmly. "So I'm escalating back." He placed the ledger on her desk, then the flash drive, then the hard drive from the safe. Margaret stared at the items. Her expression shifted from concern to recognition. "You found it," she whispered. Ryan nodded once. She moved quickly, locking the office door and pulling down the blinds. "What's on these?" she asked. "Everything," Ryan replied. "Land acquisitions, defense contracts, fraud, recorded calls." Margaret inserted the flash drive into her computer. The screen filled with file names, audio clips, scanned documents, video footage. One file labeled clearly, ridge_corridor_expansion_masterplan.pdf. She opened it. A detailed map appeared, Halstead's full vision for the valley. Private communications infrastructure running directly through the North Ridge. Fiber channels, surveillance nodes, restricted zones. Margaret leaned back slowly. "This is federal-level corruption," she said. Ryan nodded. "His men tried to force a sale last night," he added. "When that didn't work, they burned the barn." Margaret's jaw tightened. "You understand what this means?" she said. "If this is authentic, and it appears to be, we can stop more than a land grab. We can dismantle him." Ryan met her eyes. "That's the plan." Margaret moved swiftly, dialing a number from memory. "State Attorney's Office," she said when someone answered. "I need to speak with Special Investigator Daniel Klein. Tell him Margaret Doyle is calling about Victor Halstead." Ryan stood quietly, Atlas lying at his feet. The dog's breathing was steady. Margaret spoke in measured tones, summarizing only enough to secure immediate attention. Within an hour, 2 unmarked state vehicles rolled into Cedar Hollow. Special Investigator Daniel Klein was tall, mid-40s, with sharp eyes, and a habit of listening more than speaking. He reviewed the documents silently. His expression did not change, but the tension in the room thickened. "You're certain these came from your grandfather?" Klein asked Ryan. "Yes," Ryan replied. "He documented everything." Klein looked at the map of the Ridge Corridor again. "He's been building a private network under federal cover," he said quietly, "and diverting funds to secure leverage." Margaret folded her arms. "He tried to accelerate foreclosure on this property yesterday," she added. "Emergency claim." Klein's eyes hardened. "He's nervous." Ryan said nothing. He didn't need to. By afternoon, word reached town that a court hearing had been scheduled regarding the foreclosure claim. Halstead had moved fast. He assumed the land could be seized before Ryan understood its value. He didn't anticipate resistance. The courthouse filled quietly that evening. Cedar Hollow wasn't used to spectacle, but rumor moved faster than snowmelt. Townspeople lined the back walls, whispering. Halstead entered with controlled confidence. Expensive coat, polished shoes, calm smile. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a benefactor. Ryan sat at the rear of the courtroom with Atlas at his feet. The bandage was visible but clean. The dog's eyes never left the aisle. Margaret stood at the front beside Klein. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Halstead's attorney presented the foreclosure claim, citing alleged unpaid contractual obligations and breach of financial agreement. Margaret rose calmly. "Your Honor," she said, "we have newly submitted evidence regarding Mr. Halstead's financial practices tied directly to this property." She handed over the ledger copy, then the digital files. Klein stepped forward next, presenting official documentation, confirming an active state investigation. Halstead's expression shifted for the first time. Subtle, but visible. The judge reviewed the material slowly. The courtroom grew quiet. Margaret's voice remained steady. "The North Ridge parcel was targeted not for development," she said, "but for concealment of unauthorized communications infrastructure funded through falsified federal contracts." A murmur rippled through the room. Halstead's attorney objected. Klein produced signed warrants. The judge's face hardened. 2 additional state officers entered quietly from the side doors. Halstead stood abruptly. "This is outrageous," he said. Klein stepped forward. "Victor Halstead," he said calmly, "you are being detained pending formal charges related to fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation of federal funds." The courtroom fell silent. Halstead's composure fractured. Just briefly. Long enough for everyone to see it. He glanced once toward the back of the room, toward Ryan. Their eyes met. There was no shouting, no spectacle, just the quiet collapse of control. Halstead was escorted out. The foreclosure claim was dismissed immediately. The Ridge remained Ryan's. Outside, snow continued to fall softly over Cedar Hollow. Atlas rose slowly beside Ryan as the courtroom emptied. Ryan knelt and rested a hand on the dog's head. "It's done," he said quietly. Atlas's tail moved once, but Ryan knew something else. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. The Ridge was safe, for now, and Halstead's empire had begun to crack. The fight had shifted from survival to justice, and for the first time since stepping into that bunker, Ryan felt something close to peace. Snow melted slowly over the next week, revealing blackened timbers where the barn once stood. What had been intimidation now looked like a scar across the land, a reminder of how close everything had come to being lost. Ryan stood in the field one early morning, hands in his pockets, breath visible in the cold air. Atlas rested beside him, shoulders still healing, but strength returning with each passing day. The ridge above them no longer felt threatened. It felt claimed. Cedar Hollow had shifted too. Where once there had been quiet distance, there were now small gestures of support. The old man from the general store drove up one afternoon with a thermos of coffee and a sack of nails. "Heard you might be rebuilding," he said gruffly, handing Ryan the bag. Ryan nodded. Something like that. Another neighbor stopped by later with a trailer of scrap lumber salvaged from an old shed. No grand speeches, no applause, just quiet acknowledgement. Atlas seemed to sense the change as well. He moved more freely now, patrolling the edge of the property without tension. His bandage was gone, replaced by a faint scar hidden beneath new fur. Ryan began clearing the field where the barn had burned. He worked methodically, hauling charred beams aside, stacking usable wood, dragging debris into neat piles. The physical labor steadied him in ways therapy never quite had. Each swing of the hammer, each lifted plank, felt like reclaiming something. At night, he and Atlas returned to the bunker, not as fugitives, but as caretakers. Ryan aired out the space fully, installing battery-powered lanterns and reinforcing the hatch. He cleaned the shelves, reorganized the supplies, and set up a small desk near the wall where the ledger once rested. The bunker no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a foundation. One evening, as the sky faded into deep purple over the valley, Ryan sat at the desk reviewing architectural sketches. He had found the original foundation lines of his grandfather's farmhouse beneath overgrown grass. Stone blocks still marked the corners. The structure had once faced east, toward the sunrise. He wanted to rebuild it, not exactly as it had been, but close enough to honor what it meant. Atlas lay near the entrance, chin resting on his paws, ears flicking at every sound above. "You think he'd approve?" Ryan asked quietly. Atlas blinked once. Ryan smiled faintly. Margaret Doyle stopped by one afternoon with paperwork confirming the final dismissal of all claims against the property. "Halstead's assets are frozen," she said. "Federal charges are stacking up. You're in the clear." Ryan nodded. "Thank you," he said. Margaret studied the ridge for a moment. "Your grandfather believed in this land," she said. "He believed it could protect what mattered." Ryan looked out across the valley. He was right. Word spread that Ryan planned to convert part of the property into a small retreat for veterans and working dogs. Not a grand operation, just a place of quiet recovery. A few men from town volunteered equipment. A local carpenter offered guidance on framing. Laura Bennett stopped by weekly to check Atlas's healing and stayed for coffee longer each time. Slowly, the isolation that had once defined Ryan's life softened. He still woke sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing from dreams that hadn't fully faded. But now, when he opened his eyes, he didn't see the ceiling of a truck cab or the sterile walls of a base apartment. He saw timber beams above him, newly raised. He heard wind across the ridge. He felt Atlas's steady breathing at the foot of his bed. The land was no longer a battleground. It was a promise. One afternoon, as Ryan walked the ridge line, he paused at the exact spot where Atlas had first dug into the soil. The concrete hatch blended seamlessly into the hillside now, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Ryan crouched and ran his hand across the moss. "You kept me safe," he murmured, thinking of his grandfather. Atlas stepped closer, pressing against his side. The ridge overlooked the entire valley. From this vantage point, Ryan could see the town, the distant road, and the stretch of land Halstead had once intended to control. Control. That word meant something different now. Control wasn't domination. It was stewardship. It was responsibility. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the snow-dusted peaks, Ryan stood tall at the ridge crest. Atlas stood beside him, not as a weapon, not as a shield, but as a partner. The land had been reclaimed, and so had he. Spring came slowly to the Bitterroot Mountains. Snow retreated into the shadows of pine trunks. Streams ran louder as meltwater carved its way downhill. The charred scar where the barn once stood had already begun to soften beneath new grass, pushing through the soil. Ryan stood at the edge of the ridge one early morning, Atlas beside him, both facing east. The sunrise rolled over the valley in long bands of gold. Light caught the distant roofs of Cedar Hollow, glinted off the river bend, and settled finally on the north face where everything had changed. It had been months since the courtroom. Halstead's name now appeared in state news reports with phrases like federal indictment and multi-agency investigation. His development plans stalled, his holdings frozen. The corridor he had tried to control lay quiet. Ryan didn't follow the headlines closely. His focus was here. The house frame now stood tall where the old farmhouse foundation had rested. Timber beams cut from local pine rose clean and strong. Volunteers from town had helped raise the walls, but Ryan had driven every anchor bolt himself. Atlas moved carefully around the worksite, favoring his shoulder less each day. The scar beneath his furs had healed into a pale line, a permanent reminder of a night that could have ended differently. Ryan walked toward the bunker entrance, now concealed by careful landscaping and reinforced with a new internal locking system. It was no longer a hidden refuge. It was a secure archive. Inside, the space felt different from the first day he stepped down those concrete stairs. The shelves were organized, supplies inventoried. A small American flag hung neatly above the desk where the ledger once lay. On the far wall, framed and mounted, rested the letter that had changed everything. You were never abandoned. You were shielded. Ryan paused in front of it. He had read that line 100 times. It no longer hurt. It steadied him. Atlas padded down the stairs behind him and lay near the base of the desk, chin resting on his paws. You'd like this, Ryan murmured quietly, thinking of his grandfather. The ridge, the house, the quiet. He moved toward the cot and sat down. During renovation weeks earlier, he had discovered something he had missed the first time. A small envelope tucked into the insulation lining the rear wall. It had taken him an hour of careful removal to find it without damaging the structure. He reached into the desk drawer and pulled that envelope out now. The paper was thinner than the first letter, the handwriting slightly shakier. Ryan opened it slowly. Ryan, if you found this, then you stayed. That tells me everything I need to know. I always believed high ground mattered. In war, in life, in character. The North Ridge was never just land. It was position. Whoever stands there decides what happens below. I did what I could to hold that position for you. But high ground means nothing if you stand there alone. Build something that lasts, not for revenge, for refuge. I could not give you an easy life, but I could give you solid ground. Grandad Ryan lowered the letter carefully. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in a steady rhythm. He climbed back up the stairs and stepped out into sunlight. Atlas followed and stood beside him at the ridge crest. The valley below was quiet. No black SUVs, no distant tension. Just open land. Ryan crouched and ran his hand along the moss-covered concrete seam where Atlas had first dug. Trust the dog, he said softly. Atlas glanced up at him, ears forward. You did, Ryan added. He remembered the bus depot in Spokane. The flickering lights. The nights in the truck where sleep never came. The weight of anger he carried like armor. That man felt distant now, not erased, transformed. He still carried scars, still woke occasionally with echoes of old missions replaying in fragments. But the panic no longer owned him. He had ground beneath his feet. He had purpose. Later that afternoon, a pickup truck rolled slowly up the dirt road. Two younger veterans stepped out, one with a service dog in training. They stood uncertainly near the field. Ryan walked toward them. You looking for the ridge? He asked. The taller of the two nodded. Heard you might be opening something here, for guys like us. Ryan glanced back toward the house frame, then to Atlas, who stood tall at his side. Yeah, Ryan said. We're building. Atlas stepped forward and sniffed the younger dog calmly, assessing but welcoming. Ryan felt something settle inside him. This was what high ground meant. Not dominance, not control. Stewardship. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ridge. The timber frame of the house caught the light and glowed warm against the dark forest. Ryan stood there for a long moment, Atlas steady beside him, wind brushing across the hillside. The land was no longer a battleground. It was a foundation. The past had not imprisoned him. It had prepared him. And on the high ground of the Bitterroot Mountains, a former Navy SEAL and his loyal K-9 stood not as survivors, but as builders. The ridge watched over the valley, and for the first time in years, Ryan Mercer felt completely, undeniably home. If you believe some ground is worth standing on, type yes in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight to protect what's yours, your land, your family, your name, drop A so we know you're here. Justice doesn't always come easy, but it's worth the wait. Subscribe and stay with us for more stories about grit, loyalty, and holding your ground in the land of the free.